Do you remember those days when you were at the center? When you would heave that screeching screen door open, shouting already, tripping off the porch in the fever of play. Euphoria. Your siblings were behind you, and your friends. The world was ahead. Its every corner unfurled in you some primal, living secret. Exploration was your default. Adventure was your nature. The crumbling leaf beneath your fingers, the freshness of the dirt that smudged your hands, and the scent of it. The scent of an open world. Do you remember the ferns with those ranks of countless seeds, clinging to their pale undersides? Do you remember how they'd scatter and shower at a flick? How you were in awe to peel up some tiny, ordinary thing like that and find such order? Do you remember how the ferns would rear above you on the banks, beckoning with their curved shadows? How they were the same ferns you'd seen in the far-off jungle in some movie, or on the pages of those same books where dinosaurs were living? Remember how you would tear across the lawn and into the woods, roaring with delight, calling out your place or name in whatever game that you were playing. Remember the sense of taking on that role, how somehow in turning absolutely outward, you were brought into yourself again. Remember how it possessed you, mindless, no house, no vast web of internet converging on your brain, nothing crouching on the doorstep. The house was only for water, for whenever you grew thirsty. It was only shade and fan and maybe ice cream. Remember these guys, roly-polies? Remember the crank of a bicycle with a far too sagging chain? Remember how you'd set up boards to make a ramp jump and they would clatter as they fell? Remember sprinklers? Water droplets in the sunlight, the smell of water from a summer hose, and how it was different in the shade and the sun? Remember the ninjas who ran along the highway outside your car windows, especially when it was raining? Remember the first time you saw a pomegranate? Is it beautiful or terrifying? I still don't know. Remember snapping rulers and pencils in half while testing how bendy they were, and then pausing, realizing with horror that you'd meant to do it, that you'd known you were going to push it to that point, that you'd somehow convinced yourself you didn't mean to while knowing in another layer of your mind that you quite very did? Or was that just the boys? My sisters report a concerning lack of comprehension at those stories. Do you remember running down the hall after turning out the lights, just to be certain that if there were anything there, it couldn't get you? Do you remember skinning your hands? How long has that been? And what happened to the little wiggly things that were always jerking around in the sky? They're still there. Even roly-polies are still there. You just haven't inhabited the bug space that you must in order to forget the world. Remember how the wild play would sweep you up, away from the human regarding of the ordinary day, away from the bathroom mirror where you would face your ordinary stresses. But no, you were a child, you had no ordinary stresses. The bathroom mirror was just a morning place for brushing, drawing faces in the shower steam, painting with your mother's makeup and spritzing the host of bottled products, clattering through it all and thinking someone must have accidentally bought a dozen of the same from a dozen different places, because how many individual creams could possibly do something novel to a face? And then you'd run out, the cereals would be all in a line, the bacon sizzling, the egg yolks shimmering, but you saw none of that as that, none of them as crystal individuals. You inhabited the moment, you felt the essence of it, one great golden egg yolk haze, the window in its place, spilling in the sunlight of the morning, promising the freedom just outside, the voices of your parents and your siblings and your dog, scampering through it all like mad, infected by the gladness. The sustenance was on the table, the night's rest had been deep, the world was outside. Of course there were no ordinary stresses in the bathroom mirror. No. It is the adult mind that looks back, longing, and tries to find some kernel at the center of the haze. So it calls to mind the shimmer of the egg yolk, the scent of dark roast coffee, and a faint recognition of Columbia far away. It calls to mind the tapping of the dog's claws on the floor, the voices of the children, the rattle of the tongs amid the pop and sizzle of the bacon. We scrabble for the seed of childhood in these places, but it is in some ways an impossible task, a desire only stoked in reaching back, and yet even that is something. Even that returns us to some guiding star. For if we lose even desire, then what pretense can we have for life? We strain for things that can be grasped completely, and we call this maturity, but it's just a phatic dignity, the dignity of non-self. To cling to what is concrete is to sacrifice the porous, fluid process of creation by which the world and its creatures move each through the other. We must be gentle with ourselves. we adults, for it is we who bear the world forward. This muddy, ordinary kernel-seeking is true somehow, and somehow, eventually, it is the thing that keeps the moment from its death. It is a sensible thing. It reveals fragility, but not futility. How else? How else can the adult mind make a thing incarnate but by catching it in its ether shape and snapping it down into the fiber of the moment? But still, we must be wary. Because remember when you did not need to. Remember when you inhabited the present and knew the wisdom not of thought but of the body? Where is that innocent, audacious thing, that creature that embraced wonder without question? You feel somehow that the center has moved on. Dismay has filled the gap. Maybe dread. The galaxy no longer wheels about the roaring of your laughter in the forest, the grime upon your hands, the joyful sting of acorn tag, the thunder of your cops and Robert's heartbeat. The center has moved on, and we search for it in desperation. But, in some ways, it is meant to move on. Onward, upward, because however much we wish it, we cannot stay merely children. No, even until now I have been speaking half-part fancy, the essence of the child, maybe the spirit of the child, but children are not pure purity, or the finitude of every moment, or the infinitude of gnosis with the body carrying its mind like water carries light. The child is not purely that. Also there is weakness, cruelty, the impulse of the beast. The child carries seeds also of damnation. We look for purity in whimsy, but we forget that fairy tales were and often should remain a dreadful thing. No, you cannot stay the child. If the great hunter-gatherers could have survived simply through play, there would be no need for maturity with age. So certainly in their adult minds there were at least the seeds of our modern discontent. But there is this expanding circle that we must attend to. We start with the child, raw impulse, self unto self and only in the moment, oblivious to the outward-reaching web of interconnected relationships that together generate our being. Then there's the early socialization, there's the recognition of the future, the dawning of responsibility, the comparison. Such horror! Who will I be? I must be someone, here among these others. Why is there so much that I am not? Outward and upward the center moves. The many tendrils of identity become all tangled. It becomes a chore to simply know your thoughts as yours, to even perceive the self and how it can be centered. Forget about achieving or aiming towards some sort of balance. We're suspended in an ever-shifting tension, strung up in the gap between raw impulse and self-discipline, between responsibility and passion, between the conviction of the now, respect for what has been, and wonder at future possibility. Where is the self? Where does compassion or forgiveness turn to fear or people-pleasing? Where does ambition turn to cold-hearted egocentrism? Where does conscientiousness turn to eternal angst? Where does authenticity become mere foolishness or self-absorption? With growing dismay, you see that what you always thought were strengths are turned aside to reveal gaping weaknesses beneath. How does the individual know where the collective keeps him sane, and how can he be bold enough to goad the collective in the right direction? How to find the line between the parents with their dreadfully familiar, high-resolution shortcomings and this more sweeping, nebulous appeal of the masses, of every way your family is abnormal. We have to think about these things. Perhaps not as much as the philosopher in all his tangled pretension, but perhaps more than the ape did, swinging in the jungle. In fact, it strikes me that the child, especially the pre-verbal child, can be compared to the ape, while his mirroring facilities are yet unfilled. His emotions are more raw and seething. He is a kraken for experience, and experience consumes or embeds itself in his every faculty. But this is unsustainable. The world presses, predators are lurking, there are endeavors to be endeavored, and we do not want only to play, we want to create. And that means integration with the future, with the community, with our skills and where they end. Unless you want the hermit's path, to create a shoddy madness in your own cave and never share it, never see it tested. If you can find fulfillment there, perhaps you can remain within your cave. That is the child. That is the madman. That is the would-be sage that never gives his wisdom. But most of us don't want that. So, you become a certain sort of way, which is to say not other ways, and then you act that way out upon the world, and you fail, and then that's where you remember that something precious, priceless, was captured in that mindless child. It must be integrated, yes, mastered, but never cast aside. Something there is at the heart of us, the wonder at the jungle, the peeling back the mystery, the dread, but awe, the tingle of them both, the impossible sweetness of it when you look into the face of the jaguar, the glacier, the sea and storm, into the face of something truly wild. The woman you have known, who somehow takes your breath all in an instant, how all the past converges then, and you realize with grave dismay that you know nothing of this thing you have been building. Why does the warrior need the madness of the pipes? When you were a child, you knew only of your body and the space that it possessed. The world was your place of being. You possessed and were possessed by it, and you were the center. But then you woke up, here in this world with a future, a society, with obligation, and even worse, these days, you wake up in this world with an internet. We persevered in jungle and savanna, beset by leopard and serpent, beset by famine and infection, beset by one another. We persevered with our atlatls and our fire, as we wove cloth and spun the potter's clay and tamed the beasts and bent the wheel out from natural shapes, as we dug out furrows and planted seeds, and then to bricks, to cities, taxes and mathematics, tallies marked in clay, and on to industry, electrical, and now this wild, modern age. Does it take us further from ourselves with every step? Is that why we grow sickly and turn in and in upon our dread? Certainly technology is strange that way. It extracts the tool out from the body and leaves its chemical circuitry unfulfilled. Maybe an atlatl was still hormone affirming. We gave up some level of brawn and we got our brains and throwing arms, and our circuits still fed back reward. Maybe pottery was still affirming, and the wheel and the baskets. We were creatures of imagination and of tongue, and now we could fashion something other than the wild. We could make art upon it with our hands. We could bring the stars down onto clay and make a map and speak to our children of the path and of its walking, and all of this affirmed some space inside the mind which we had built. And fire and metalwork and the songs that make you tremble. Certainly we are creatures of technology. So much of us is suspended in the space outside the body, in the patterns of meaning that we weave between ourselves, and it resonates in this space because of this abstraction. And yet, it reached some point now, maybe with electrical, maybe instantaneous communication, maybe digital, maybe just the raw awareness, instantaneous awareness of the entire globe, and all these patterns of our supply chains and our politics and our quantum physics. It reached some point now where all these patterns are so abstract, they no longer bring meaning down to hum inside the human body. It just remains there, just floating cold cognition. We know we punch in buttons, pull some levers, and freight ships suddenly have brought us oranges all the way from China. We know that we're dealing with connections that exist, we just don't feel connected to them. They're so wildly incomprehensible, the systems that now govern us. Perhaps we can only feel a smallness in recognizing that our functioning has become so abstracted that we no longer know why it is we function, that we are no longer needed in some way. We are strung here at the center of this great abstracted web. It enters your body as an alien, and it does not leave. It only presses and compounds, and it demands more mind. Mind the elsewhere, mind the future, mind the other. Remember that there is no center. Everything is elsewhere. You are just an instrument, or worse, an ornament, spinning in the orbit of the great suspended in-between. Or else it shouts, "Look at this! How will you, O small thing, become the center that you must to be content? How will you compete? Shout your name and paste your highlights. Reach and claw and scrabble. Take the child back. It is a hobby you can purchase. It is a thing to think about, if you would just think rightly. It is a chain of words to speak, to pour your mind into the proper lettered channel. It is a place to go, a future where you must arrive. It is a need. Do you not know that all these other people have it? They are all just one step closer, one step closer. See the way they talk about their journey? See how it fits neatly? Where they come from, who they are, and thus a simple path is laid. So sometimes you try the simple path. Technology shoves it in front of your face, after all. Look at all these bright, clean things. Look at all the symmetry. Look at photogenic food and photogenic travel compilations and the highlights of all your favorite films over and over, and concerningly young girls dancing TikTok dances. Look at their smiles. Don't they seem so real? Don't you wish you could have them, boys? Don't you hope you're more desirable than them, girls? Or video games. Why keep the girls real at all? Graphics are getting better and better, and in video games you can fight. You can ride dragons. You can adventure. Perception is real, after all, so why not code it into ourselves, the adventure, with new circuitry and feedback loops? That's what science offers, right? We can isolate the variables and poke the proper buttons. Put on a headset, inject yourself with anti-stress. Oh, too bad, didn't work. You still remember that there's a world out there? Okay, no bother. Inject yourself with forgetting. Look at the trees. They're so green and clean. And the dragons, so big. And look how you can summon cars and skip all the boring things like packing and travel and training, and you can just get straight to the thing itself. Ah, science. Experience, challenge, reward. It offers the entire circuit, just without the inefficiency. But then you need to go outside one day, and you notice that the dirt is actually a giant part of it. The smell, the roughness of the bark. They've started trying to simulate more dirt and roughness in the games, but it doesn't come close. They've tried to make the colors so vibrant, they didn't realize the vibrance of life is in the messiness of the organic. Then you realize, wait, I can actually carve a spear myself. A real one. There are actual trees here, and you can cut them down with your hands. And sawdust falls on you. It actually gets on your pants and in your hair, and then you have to skin the tree and find some cord to bind the spearhead. Oh, you need a spearhead, and there are real stones, and you can hit them just so and actually chip yourself a real spearhead in the world. There are actual winds and actual windsurf boards. There are actual ways to tie the knots and fail and get dumped into the water. There are actual places to explore. Not only are you seeing it, you are, feeling it with your fingers. There's a chance of actual bleeding. And that heaving in your chest when you run, letting you know how horridly out of shape you are, that's what a game would simulate if it could. That's what they're still working towards. Wait a minute. Does digital sanitize the reality that actually makes us resonate? Does its efficiency actually skip over the entire thing that makes a journey so fulfilling? Where is this wholeness you felt as a child, when play was all-consuming? Why is your path now an endless gibbering? Why are you so cursed? Was all that happiness just a folly of your child self? How can you get back? Maybe farming is the answer? Wheat fields like living gold, surrounded by so many little lives you husband through the world? Would warfare be the answer? Run the trenches in Ukraine, feel the terror of the drone above you, remember once again your mortal coil. Or money, maybe. Enough champagne and the dread becomes as effervescent as the bubbles. Enough spotlights, and you do not need to see beyond your circle. Or maybe absolute forgetting. Madness. Drink. If you wake from sleep every single day, and that web is still there pressing in, if your mind cannot forget by sanity or Netflix or Thanksgiving for a day, perhaps then madness is the way. Or maybe dread is just our fate. Maybe it's the very thing of growth. Maybe all is meaningless unless you have a cross to bear. That's the Christian suggestion. Or maybe the slaying of the ego, formlessness, the epiphany of non-self. Let go. See the world as it is. All is impermanence. All is unease. So suffering is the only end of any craving. Or the psychoanalyst. Integration. Integrate the child with the wanderer, with the warrior, with the king. Integrate the maiden with the mother, with the matriarch. Or the altruists. Overcome the suffering by finding joy in mitigating suffering, in constraining it along the lines of what humans willingly and freely choose. Or the stoic. Accept that the world is outside your control. Focus on controlling the landscape of your expectations, your aims, and your willingness to suffer. Or the absurdist. Declare your life through wild, individual action. Act out the thing that you most seem to be. Or the artist. Create. Make yourself a little god and weave something from the chaos to your own delight. Or the Eleusinians. Merge with the divine, here with this body. Drink your soma or your kikion, and feel how little dread there is when the unity of being slices through the division between the seer and the seen, the wonder and the wanderer. Do we feel it now, as we did with our atlatls, huddled round our fires in the dark? We can only speculate and wonder. Was the hunter-gatherer more peaceful? Did he feel centered as the child does? Did he glory in the chill of sea spray, or the morning, or the dreadful sweep of granite? Did the Mongol feel more glory in his fast and wild step, or the lonely camel caravaner in his melted honey sunset, or the Dane in his longship, scourged by wind and frigid spray, Or the Celts in their green highlands, sounding the carnix to the mists? Did they feel more glory, then? I suppose we cannot know for certain, but a part of us feels it must be so. And yet sometimes I wonder if this was always the same landscape, if every generation may have wandered this same existential struggle. Many thousands of years ago, a supposed man named Lao Tzu supposedly grew tired of life and took his leave of civilization, hoping to live in solitude. He met a guard who refused him passage until he supposedly wrote down his many wisdoms, and thus was born the Tao Te Ching. Even in that supposedly primitive state, it discusses the fret and fraying of the mind, the impermanence of peace, and the futility of our worldly endeavors. The ancient Hindus as well, of course, have their discussions of despair. Dukkha, central to both Hinduism and its offshoots, is the idea that suffering, or perhaps better, unease, is the fundamental feature of reality. It is the despair that comes when you recognize the impermanence of all things. Then around the 5th and 6th centuries BC, Hinduism was undergoing a great upheaval in what is called the Second Urbanization. Inequality was rife. We were disillusioned with our rituals and collectivism. We were disillusioned with urbanization. Many of our occupations were suddenly less needed. Out of this grew several Shramana traditions, seeker traditions, which emphasized personal liberation, renunciation of material aims, and the practice of individual virtue and wisdom over the more rigid, collective mindset that had maintained religious rituals. Among these which emerged are Jainism, which is so concerned with suffering they will strain their drinks with cloth to ensure they drink no tiny bugs. Overcome your suffering by concerning yourself maximally with the suffering of everything else. And Buddhism. Life is suffering. The origin of suffering is attachment, but there is a path to the cessation of suffering if one thinks and lives well. Buddhism is well summed up in this statement, supposedly from the man himself. The world is afflicted by death and decay, but the wise do not grieve, knowing the nature of the world. Then the Bible. Oh, the Bible, full of existential dread. I was really glad to go back here in the making of this video, and a couple other projects I've been working on. It just takes on a whole new light, a whole new range of flexible layers, now that I don't feel bound to understand and integrate it according to an institutional framework. Despair in Jesus we might expect, as he was burdened with all the cosmic darkness of all being, but the psalmist also gave us such delightful passages as the following. I am weary with groaning. All night I make my bed swim. I drench my couch with tears. My eye wastes away because of grief. It grows old because of all my enemies. My tears have been my food day and night, while they continually say to me, Where is your God? For my soul is full of troubles, and my life draws near to the grave. I am counted with those who go down to the pit. I am like a man who has no strength, adrift among the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, and who are cut off from your hand. And from his son Solomon in Ecclesiastes, Meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed all is vanity and grasping for the wind. So I returned and considered all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and look, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. On the side of their oppressors there is power, but they have no comforter. The point is, in looking back, our little friend despair seems to have been here all along. Suffering, groaning, dismay and dread, anxiety and depression. By Jove, in what is often recognized as the very oldest story, we have our hero Gilgamesh who, upon losing his friend Enkidu, grows weary of life and sets out to learn how death might be overcome. In his search, he meets Siduri, tavern keeper, goddess of wine. She attempts to dissuade him from his quest, urges him to find contentment in the present moment. But he responds, And why should not my cheeks be starved and my face drawn? Despair is in my heart, and my face is the one who has made a long journey. It was burned with heat and with cold. Why should I not wander over the pastures in search of the wind? She answered, Gilgamesh, where are you hurrying to? You will never find that life for which you are looking. When the gods created man, they allotted to him death, but life they retained in their own keeping. As for you, Gilgamesh, fill your belly with good things, day and night and day, dance and be merry, feast and rejoice, let your clothes be fresh, bathe yourself in water, cherish the little child that holds your hand, and make your wife happy in your embrace, for this too is the lot of man. But Gilgamesh said to Siduri, How can I be silent? How can I rest, when Enkidu whom I love is dust, and when I too shall die and be laid in the earth? So blah 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 blah, he's hoping to find Utnapishtim to learn how to evade death. Give me directions, I will cross the ocean if it is possible, if it's not I will wander still further in the wilderness, that sort of thing. The winemaker said to him, Gilgamesh, there is no crossing the ocean. Whoever has come since the days of old has not been able to pass that sea. The sun in his glory crosses the ocean, but who besides Shamash has ever crossed it? So yes, if it is coded into the very first story, maybe we have always had this angst. And look at the clarity, the directness with which he speaks here. This is an old story, which means it's a distillation of the primary, say the most archetypal ideas that were useful enough and clear enough to be remembered and passed down and eventually recorded. And yes, you always have something like monsters, deaths, retrievals from the underworld, searches for immortality, spurning the gods, love and unrequited love, vengeance, blah blah blah. It's no surprise it's a story about a friend who died, but he's very clearly despairing. Gilgamesh, there is no crossing. Whoever has come has not been able to pass. Where are you hurrying to? You will never find the life for which you are looking. When the gods created man, they allotted to him death, but life they retained in their own keeping. Fill your belly with good things, dance and be merry, bathe yourself in water, cherish the little child that holds your hand, for this too is the lot of man. Happiness is impermanent. Its primacy can only be affirmed in the ongoing journey, in the search not for happiness but for continued purpose. Completion is a process, it is not an end you reach. You are not happy because you do the right things or gain the right things. You are happy because you do and gain things rightly. Happiness can only ever be fulfilled if it accompanies you, tangential to purpose. It is like a trapping which emerges only when the task is pursued with wholeness. It is like sleep, or poetry, or lovemaking. You can only bask in its presence once you get your eyes off the thing and the pursuit and the performance of the thing, and once you inhabit the moment for itself. Whether it be a task, a performance, a stillness, it only comes with the abandoning of self-regard. It is a boundary in the spirit or mind which emerges only with the proper orientation of everything inside. In this way, happiness imbues each action with an ultimate sort of meaning which, in self-regarding, often only fragments or haunts the mind. In the same way, the end of life is death. It is the ultimate affirmation. It is the boundary by which things become defined, by which they come into identity and can be said to have a distinct value. Without this boundary of journey unto end, well then you're just suffering. Consider Marcus Aurelius. Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly. What doesn't transmit light creates its own darkness. Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. Then there's Soren Kierkegaard, early emo and father of existentialism, and conveyor of a quite fantastic tower of hair. Soren suffered in such a unique style that he felt language was not yet sufficient to the task of describing it, so he invented a new word. Angst. A word diminished to the association of rebellious adolescents, I guess. But why are they rebellious? Why are they adolescent? They're waking up. They're stepping out into society, realizing they need to fit somewhere, realizing all the ways they fail and are insufficient. They're challenged to assert themselves against the world, to carve out an identity and say, this is me. But, oh no. As you learn about what's normal, you realize your family is just one of the many. Your grid for things like love and purpose and communication is just one grid of many. Who's to say our identity is even valid? As you break out of the nest, who's to say you haven't formed it largely as a means of reacting to your parents' constraints? But what if your parents formed theirs as a reaction to society's faulty demands? How do you even know what you yourself are choosing to do? What if the very possibilities you recognize are themselves governed wholly by forces outside your command? Anyway, even if it is diminishing to have your word become associated with moody teenagers, Kierkegaard was very often like a moody teenager, complaining that no one understood him and that he was burdened with some secret affliction. I have no need of friends, he said. I am completely self-sufficient, and yet I am consumed by a craving for understanding. I have just read a critique of my work which says that I am a remarkable writer who doesn't know what he wants. I know very well what I want, but I also know that no one will understand me. People understand me so poorly that they don't even understand my complaint about them not understanding me. But then in Kierkegaard's case, maybe he was burdened with some secret affliction. First of all, he was entirely correct. His work did become highly regarded after his death, so much so that he's considered the father of literally existentialism. 5 of his 6 siblings died before their father. He was melancholic and frail for much of his life. His father was convinced God had cursed him for condemning God in his early poverty. Kierkegaard had few constant friends save one, unrequited love, like pretty much 50% of all philosophers. Maybe that's the answer, guys. Maybe we should flee philosophy as much as we are able and seek romance at all costs, and maybe then we'll be content. But, well, don't get me started on the poets and the sculptors and the others who are supposedly romantic. Tortured, all of them. What is going on? Is it some trick of life that, looking at it most directly, seems to make one sick? Or is this not looking at life, is it instead veiling it, forcing it through abstractions like language and stories and questions, like inspecting water through some tortured construction of strange pipes when we are meant to swim? Now granted, all of these, even the earlier ones who gave us Gilgamesh, were civilized peoples. They already had extracted themselves from their bodies somewhat, to write things down. They farmed, they had social classes, they walked around in cities and used coins. The gods of abstract symbol were ascendant. The gods of the body were evolving or already dead, buried perhaps back with the wolves we had first tamed, or the first spiral scrapings on the caves that we now recognize as art. The point is, the people who wrote these things were already some distance along the slippery slope of technological damnation. So maybe that was the reason for their despair. Maybe then, even then, it was too late. Language, tool use, specialization, cooperation, somewhere in the eons past we took the wrong fork, and all the other beasts remain just beasts, blissful in their impulse without thought, incapable of articulating something out, and therefore incapable of holding it up to the mirror, and therefore incapable of doubt. Why does the child not much need these worded wisdoms? They are already in his fiber. In simple play, he joins himself already to the world. In simple laughter, he transcends the hall of mirrors that traps the adult mind. Without the child, without play, language will consume itself, and internet will consume itself, and the landscape of identity will be nothing but comparison, hollow and without end. This is why the walking on the mountain brings the high. This is why, when the great fog swallows you up, and you shiver and your face is frigid with Poseidon's breath, and the stone is slick and treacherous, and your knee is bashed and bloody, this is why still then most of all, you are made glorious by looking at the sea. This is why you can strip off your fabrics and run naked, why you want to press your face against the softness of the moss. This is why you have to go into the wasteland to become a man. This is why you have to paint your face and kill a bear and wear its fur. This is why you swear in the godswood. This is why you have to ride the sandworm, sit vigil, hang 9 days from the sacred tree. To let yourself be overwhelmed by this is an affirmation of your place in the world. It is to re-center. It is only in exceeding your boundary and your finitude that your weakness is consumed by even greater purpose. This is the dance we must return to, the painting of the face by which you step outside yourself and take on some role of dread or nature. We must confront the mind with the awe that comes from skipping over it, from returning to the body, to the moment, to the child, to the action without self-regarding. This knowledge is not the sort of knowledge that is seen or laid out in a syllogism. This is the knowledge you inhabit.